A very provocative title indeed, but somehow I needed to try and get your attention. One point I will come back to later in my critique. So what happened? Stephan Wieser released a video a couple of days ago with the title "Self-supported ultracycling has a little issue." I will put a link in the description so you can watch it later. In his video he features very prominent voices of the ultracycling scene, probably the most prominent voices in ultracycling at the moment. They anecdotally describe situations within self-supported ultracycling races where participants might have behaved unfairly. There are stories about drafting, running red lights, and a lot of unbacked claims about massive rule violations making the sport unfair. Their conclusion is a demand for a unified set of rules for all races that want to use the term self-supported ultracycling and to ideally introduce a governing body to oversee those. So who am I and what is my problem with that? I am Jakob from Flamingo Fixed. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself an ultracyclist, but I do participate in ultracycling events every now and then, and I regularly follow ultracycling races as a spectator. I think it is valid that Stefan made this video and started a discussion about the rules and fairness in ultracycling. What I don't agree on is the conclusions he and the others draw from their observations. And I don't seem to be the only one thinking that way. I will do what every serious media outlet does and quote some random internet user as an argument of authority. That no draft rules should be respected by the participants and enforced by the organizers shouldn't even be much of a discussion. I think everyone agrees with that. In my opinion, there's no need for a governing body that limits race organizers in choosing rules that might be specific to their event's necessities, conditions or length. Wieser, Strasser, Kessenheimer and Phillips fail to make a point which rules even are supposed to be unified and where they see this lack of regulation. Only vague suggestions to introduce rules to quote-unquote level the playing field. If this is really a concern about leveling the playing field, the easiest thing in my opinion would be to ban or limit the use of commercial accommodations during the race. No rider occasionally running a red light or not coming to a full stop at every stop sign gains nearly as much of an advantage as someone that can spend a person's budget for the whole week on a single night's stay. I also believe that having a media crew following you gives you more of a benefit than overextending the time you ride along another rider, assuming there's no drafting involved in both cases. Another concern about the introduction of a governing body or a unified set of rules for all races would be that the big commercial events, sponsored riders and other groups with commercial interests in the sport might easily overpower the interests of smaller races and the thousands of participants that are trying to challenge themselves and having a type 2 kind of good time. Even though cycling in the past 30 years or so has always been a sport for dentists, tech bros and agency people, there's a big group of cycling enthusiasts that come from backgrounds like the messenger and fixed gear scene, from being students commuting to school, or from working as bike mechanics. People with lower socioeconomic abilities that still like to compete and challenge themselves, but might already be overwhelmed with the multiple €100 entrance fees and the cost of the logistics of getting to and from a race that spreads across a whole state, country, or even a continent. And in my experience, those are usually the people attending, organizing and keeping alive the smaller races by the scene for the scene that might lose a good bit of the already limited attention they get if there was a governing body that decides what is and what is not an unsupported ultracycling race. And I am convinced that these kind of events and races are equally as important as the big prestigious lighthouse races like the TCR, as they lay the groundwork for the sport. enforcing, controlling, regulating or short, bureaucratizing the sport means more work for even enforcing, controlling or short, bureaucratizing the sport means more work for event organizers, which will very likely lead to even higher prices for entrance fees, thus making the community even less diverse and further excluding marginalized groups. When even seasoned ultracycling organizers like Lost Dot regularly fall short in their communication about rule violations, How are newer and smaller races supposed to keep up with the requirements? And if the small races can't do whatever is required to enforce the unified rules, therefore lose the right to use the term ultracycling or self-supported ultracycling, they also lose the attention because those are the terms we all use. And this is how we come back to the attention I was talking about in the beginning. As you might be aware, it acts as a kind of currency in our fast-paced world of overconsumption and individualized media. But if an event doesn't get attention, it won't be found by potential participants and might not be held. Unifying and enforcing standardized rules might hurt especially those who try to evolve the sport and come up with new and creative ways to challenge ourselves. All the cases described by Jana, Christoph and Andrew are not due to a lack of rules and regulations, but due to a lack of enforcement and communication. I believe that very few participants start in a race that's mainly a challenge against themselves with the intention of cheating. A lot of unfair behavior probably happens because racers don't know any better, not because there's a lack of regulation. Unfortunately, Wieser's video remains pretty vague about the actual demands, so this might be a bit of a strawman argument, as we call it in Germany, which means I might argue against a point they are not actually trying to make. But the way I understand their demands is to be very precise and regulate things like, for example, minimum distance between racers or maximum time to overtake before it's considered riding together. And I think it's unnecessary to have those rules if there's no way to control and enforce them amongst the whole field, which might actually make the races less equal. So once again, if the issue is about making the competition more equal, there would be a lot of other things that the organizers and the community could do about it. And I don't say this as a hollow whataboutism argument. I wouldn't make a case that we can't solve smaller issues as long as bigger problems exist. I really, truly believe that the absence of a unified set of rules is not an issue within our sport, and the implementation of these rules might actually hurt it. So if you care about building an inclusive sport with a diverse and living community, then please do everyone a favor and be German somewhere else. If you don't care about those values and you want to gatekeep the sport to middle-class majority society, then please go and spread your ideas of a governing body enforcing a standardized set of rules and fall for the influence of the biggest players in the game. We, the participants of the races, can and should hold ourselves accountable. Get informed about the rules of the races we are a part of before we start. Talk to each other if there's uncertainties. Not be afraid to make people aware of possible rule violations or unfair behavior, and probably most important, see it as a value to get feedback about your own behavior from other racers. Yes, they might be considered competition in that event, but remember that the biggest competitors in ultracycling races are ourselves. Probably the best comment I read underneath Wieser's video was something like, if you don't know what to do, just ask yourself, what would Robert Müller do? So let's try to be fair to ourselves and the other participants and keep this discussion alive to evolve our sports and have a good time together. Du musst nach da hinten.